This podcast does not provide medical advice. It is intended for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Never ignore professional medical advice in seeking treatment because of something you have read or heard on this podcast. If you think you have a medical emergency, immediately call your doctor or dial 911. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first episode of How Did We Get Here? And as y'all know, this is M. Up here is Miss T. And I want to tell you about the other lady in a few seconds. But let me just give you a roundabout way of what this particular podcast is about. Um, in this world, we're in a lot of bad situations. And I keep asking myself, how do we get here? And I said, I don't know, but obviously people need help on how to move forward in their lives based on different situations. Today's topic is a very touchy situation. It's a very personal situation for a lot of people who may be watching this, and we're going to be talking about suicide. We heard the news about a lot of different people who have committed suicide for different reasons, and you always ask yourself the question: they had money, they were rich, they were well known, they were why? What issues they had? They're going to kill themselves, but they still kill themselves. So today, before I start telling you about this lady up here, I'm gonna read some statistics for you, which is mind-boggling to me. In 2020, 45,979 people died by suicide in the U.S., and that equates to one death every 11 minutes. 12.2 million adults thought about suicide. 3.2 million adults made a plan to commit suicide. 1.2 adults attempted suicide. Suicide rates among males are 4 times that of females. Guns are used in more than 50% of suicides. Vets, people who live in rural areas, sexual minorities, gender minorities, middle-aged adults experience a higher level of suicide. And suicide is the third leading cause of death for between the ages of 15 and 24. Let me say that again. Suicide is the third leading cause of death between the ages of 15 and 24. That's scary. Um, so this kind of information here, I had to bring in a professional. And so now this lady up here, the professional, I'm gonna let you explain. I'm gonna let her tell you all about herself. Go ahead, Miss Della.
So I am Della Roderick. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor licensed in the state of Maryland only. I've been a licensed clinician for about going on 10 years now, working with individuals that have mental health diagnoses similar to anxiety disorders, depression, psychotic disorders, and so on. And so that is me in a nutshell. I will say, as a disclaimer, I am not, we should not use this for treatment. So this is not treatment advice. I am not your individual counselor. And so I always encourage individuals to seek further information with a licensed clinician in their area. So I am just here for informational purposes only. But I, again, have about 9 years of experience, actually more than that, treating mental health disorders.
Cool, cool. And it's one of those things that this type of subject you have to have someone who specializes in this because as we were talking earlier, my generation, because I'm a little older than you two beautiful young ladies are, it was frowned upon. Basically, it was kind of like when you was growing up, you said, "I'm going through some things," and the first thing is, "You better not kill yourself because you're gonna die and you're gonna burn in hell." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So at that point, you're like, "Hmm." So I bet, and don't besmirch my name. Don't besmirch my name by killing yourself because you kill yourself, then I got to answer everybody about you and committed suicide and what kind of upbringing. So back then, it was kind of more, don't make my name look bad because you're going through some things. And what we basically did, a lot of us back in those days, was like, okay, we're not going to kill ourselves, but then we just slowly killed ourselves by, between alcohol and drugs and just a kind of a destructive lifestyle is what we kind of lived. And eventually start to see people now in their 50s and 60s dropping off from different ailments. And that's kind of because I always think some deferred suffering that you just suffer because you didn't want to go to find any help, because also, like I was just telling the ladies, I found about therapy when I got to college. Before that, I didn't know anything about therapy. And when we were brought up, it was kind of like, go to God with it. Leave it in his hand. He'll take care of everything. And then you're like, okay, I'll leave it with him, but I still got this problem. I still feel suicidal. I feel anxious. I feel depressed. And you started questioning things like, okay, I took it to God. I still got this issue. Am I crazy? And they don't want to listen to you. So you suffered internally. You suffered in the darkness, and you mask it. And in the end, you lived a very difficult, miserable existence. But nowadays, people are lucky and fortunate enough to know about therapy early. Not you wait until you go to college or something catastrophic happens to you, and then you find out about therapy. But now we have that resource, and we have resources like Miss Della to actually talk to you guys and kind of guide you. Because again, this is about teaching you, informing you, and for you to make the change. That's the thing about this entire podcast is going to be about. It's about teaching you what the issues are, informing you that there are other people out there like you. You're not the only one that feels this way. Because when I was growing up, I just felt like, oh, maybe we're the only ones going through this. Because when we talked to each other, it was like, okay, and it was hard to talk about because you didn't feel like you were crazy, and then somebody was going to you were afraid somebody was going to go back and tell your parents, hey, you talk about committing suicide, and then that started a whole nother other things that you didn't want to have happen. You could end up in a state mental institution for a little bit because they didn't want to deal with it. They never dealt with it. That's something they never dealt with. So you're also dealing with generations that never dealt with mental illness, and they just for them pray it away or go away. But we just want to make sure that you guys understand you're not by yourself. There's a lot of people out there, and those statistics that I just read tells you there are a lot of people going through this today and tomorrow. I'm just going to just start asking Miss Della some questions. And T, you can jump in wherever you feel like jumping in. So what is suicide? Because people get that confused. Like, I feel suicidal, I feel depressed, but what truly is suicide?
So the act of committing suicide is ending one's life. And the cause of suicide is varied from person to person, to be honest with you. We really, unless that individual leaves a note of some sorts really explaining kind of what has been going on with them, or the reasons for committing to suicide, we don't know. But suicide is the act of ending one's own life.
Okay, because that's why I think a lot of people get confused. Like, oh my God, I'm depressed, so I could become suicidal, and that's really not necessary. It's actually two different things, and I think people try to combine them. Like, if I get depressed, I gotta be suicidal. That's really, if I'm wrong, if that's not really the case.
One would run into the other.
So I would like to. I'm going to interrupt to say. So you can be depressed and not have suicidal ideations or suicidal thoughts. And just because you are suicidal or you're having suicidal thoughts does not mean that you are depressed. And so depression has, and all the mental health diagnoses have a set of criteria that as a mental health clinician or even psychiatrist and so on, we have to follow in order to get to that mental health diagnosis. But depression and suicide are not one and the same. There may be a correlation there, but not a causation, meaning one does not cause the other. Depression does not cause suicide. Suicide does not cause someone to commit to depression. Suicide does not mean that you're depressed.
Okay, great. Because again, you get that wordplay out here. Everybody thinks one leads to the other, and that's really not the case. So, ladies and gentlemen, you understand, you could be one or the other, but not both. So I just want to say that. Go ahead.
Oh, you can be both. You can have depression and suicide. So suicide is an act, depression is a diagnosis. And
Gotcha.
a series of symptom presentation that got to the diagnosis.
Okay.
But suicide is the act of committing self-harm or committing to suicide to end one's own life. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And here's another question. Like, who's at risk to commit suicide? Everybody keeps thinking, oh, you gotta be off your rocker, or you gotta be, a certain socioeconomic person to commit it. But who's really at risk of committing suicide?
There are so many risk factors. Where do we begin with it? There are so many risk factors. But there are also, I want to flip it to say there's a lot of things that we can put in place to make ourselves or help our community or help our friends and family reduce their risk of suicide. And so there is not one particular reason to commit suicide. And as you see, you can, in the news recently, and again, I was never that individual's provider, but you can have everything externally, financially, popular, respected, so on and so forth, and still struggle with suicidal thoughts, or still struggle with anxiety, still struggle with depression, still struggle with mental health. And so it really is about meeting that individual where they are, through therapy, and determining what we can put in place to reduce their risk of suicide. And I feel like a lot of individuals, and kind of how do you help someone that's having suicidal thoughts, I think is really the question. I think it's creating that safe place for that individual to come to you. And similar to what you were saying with generational differences, I'm going to use your words for a second and say that maybe an older generation has said, pray it away, or you don't have it that hard, or, we tend to be very dismissive of the struggles that another individual is going through. And each person's life experience is unique to them. And when an individual feels constantly dismissed or feels like they're alone in this, and they don't have anyone to turn to, I think that when someone comes to us and says, I'm having suicidal thoughts, or I'm feeling depressed, or I'm feeling anxious, we should really create that safe place and use active listening skills and really sit with them and be with them without judgment. And if that person, and when we create those safe places, that person may be more open because of your support to going to therapy, and maybe even exploring psychiatry and getting medication management, or even if the need is there, to go to a psychiatric hospitalization for observation. So there are many, many different levels of mental health services that an individual can go through to help build that resilience. And so as an individual, if someone comes to you with suicidal thoughts, creating that safe place, actively listening to their story, letting them know that you care about them, that you're supportive of them, and then if it's healthy for you, walking with them through their healing journey, into therapy, into psychiatry, into a hospitalization if that's what's needed, into residential care if that's what's needed. And so, yeah.
Okay. Now, T, here's a question. Have you, being a hairstylist, have you dealt with clients that came to you in a state of despair or a certain mindset that made you think like, oh, I need to guide them somewhere because what I'm hearing doesn't sound right?
I think more so you would hear people after they've kind of reflect coming out of that space. Is when like you would come into my room and kind of feel like that's the safe space to speak about that. They might have already sought out some help or kind of already overcome that thought before they're willing to kind of mention it to me. Yeah, I don't think someone is forthcoming. Sometimes how much help do people really want is what I really want to know. And when are they able to go out and say, hey, I need help here? because when we talk about it, and like my whole heart itself, I'm like, oh, well, what can we do to kind of help prevent or talk to about? But when you speak, Della, it's like they need a therapy, because it's not like a band-aided situation. And so I'm just thinking, like, how forthcoming, how willing are people to come out and say, hey, I'm in need of help? And like, in what capacity do you see more people willing to come out and say that in?
That is a great question. I think that as society changes and becomes more open to therapy and learns more about mental health and how important it is, especially because of the pandemic, we are isolated and we recognize some things about ourselves, maybe dissatisfaction with life, dissatisfaction with marriage, dissatisfaction with work environments and things along those lines. And you want something, you start to recognize within yourself that you want something different. And sometimes I feel like what happens is we'll go to our friends and our family and it gets swept under the rug, or it's dismissed. Like, oh, you'll be all right. You know, at least you have a job that has benefits. You're fine. Tough it out.
Because I can't imagine I would want to like have my sister committed like to a mental psych ward or anything like that, because she's telling me about her thoughts. Because for most of us, we don't even really know how to navigate the world of mental health as far as seeking out help, even if someone would, confide in us and say, hey, I'm having, troubles, in this arena here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as an individual clinician, I have my own private practice. And so every day, I hate to say it that way, but every day individuals come to therapy with me, and it can be in person, it can be via Zoom, it can be in the community, in the comfort of an individual's home, meaning I would go to that individual. And so that's a level of mental health services. That's therapy. That's basic. I don't want to say basic, but that is therapy. And then you have more intensive intervention services like going to a hospital to be committed. And so because an individual may be having suicidal thoughts, it's really important to get connected to that therapist or that psychiatrist to do an evaluation to determine how safe they are for themselves, and if they need to go to a hospital for additional observation. So you may have suicidal thoughts, but that doesn't mean you may need to be hospitalized always. That's why it's so important to get connected to someone who can do that evaluation and walk through what level of care that individual needs.
So kind of going back on what you said, Malcolm, as far as if someone comes to me directly, right? I'm at work and just, I'm casually working. What are the proper resources? What is the proper avenue and channels to recommend and refer people to seek help? Because if I'm thinking like, if that ever fell into my lap and I'm just like, they need help, I don't know that I know exactly where to direct them.
That's true. That's a very true statement, because you get hit with that and it's like, oh, what do I do? Well, the first thing I want to do is call 911. I said, God damn, you're crazy. I got to call 911. But that's, but that's my reactive me saying, I got to get him help. So my thing is getting help, dial 911. But as we both, all three of us know, calling the police to a situation like that could convert to something that end up on the news. Yes, a totally different outcome, rather than we're going to get you some help. Next, there's a crime scene happening. So that's another set of issues why people should know, how to handle it. Like, what are the signs of suicide? I mean, because again, some people act certain ways and you just think, oh, they're acting goofy. But there's some people acting certain ways that, oh, that's a little unusual. So what signs, what's kind of the obvious signs that us as laymen wouldn't know? You as a clinician will say, oh, I know that sign.
So so the person literally telling someone or confessing, if you will, that they are wanting to commit suicide, and then they begin making plans for such. right? And when I say plans, I mean sometimes in every individual that has committed to suicide has had a different journey. And so sometimes the individual's statement saying, hey, I'm thinking about committing suicide, or starting to pack their bags away or start giving items away to other individuals, and preparing themselves for the afterlife, for death, for that. And so, but what I also want to say is that when an individual begin early intervention, from my perspective, is incredibly important. And so as a licensed clinician myself, I started at 5 years old. A 5-year-old can come into services and we can address some behavioral issues that they may be having in school, in the home, in the community, and so on. And so I always like to say we don't want to wait to the last minute until there is this explosive situation to call 911 or to call crisis intervention. If you're noticing some behavioral changes with that person and they're not quite seeming right, from a family perspective, a friend perspective, there's something a little different about them recently, then I would sit down with them again and create that safe place and say, hey, I'm noticing some changes with you. What's going on? And if that individual says, yeah, I'm struggling with depression, or I'm struggling with anxiety, or I'm struggling with these thoughts, I don't know what to do, let's hold a non-judgmental space and say, hey, let me go on Psychology Today and find, let's look at a therapist, or let's go on therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. There's a number of different resources. But if in that moment that person comes to you and says, I am going to commit suicide, I want to end my life, calling 988 is a suicide crisis hotline number. Calling 988 and getting immediately contacted to a crisis intervention specialist, who will do it on, it can be online, but it can also be on the phone, to do an assessment to determine where that person is, if they need to be hospitalized, if they need an appointment, follow-up care, and so on, especially if they're in that crisis.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know, because again, so many things are happening now, and like you said, with the pandemic has changed a lot of people's lives and put a lot of stress that a lot of people have never had before. I mean, it's one thing saying I got to deal with health issues, but to say I have no job, I got health issues, that puts a lot of unnecessary strain on people that they never had to deal with. And it was like, where do you go to deal with it? Especially when everybody's dealing with it. So it wasn't like just you, everybody was dealing with that, so, and the other thing was thing I heard is talking about suicide, putting suicide in someone's head if they're going through some things. Maybe they're going through some things, and you jump to conclusions like, hey, you think about committing suicide? And you're like, since you mentioned it, I never thought about it, but
yeah,
so does that make somebody commit suicide by talking to them about it?
No, there is no, what I will say, and I'm glad that you brought that up. It's so important. Talking about suicide does not encourage someone to commit to suicide or increase the risk of that individual committing to suicide. So it's so important to talk about suicide. It's important to talk about mental health. It's important to talk about our feelings, our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, having that open dialogue, because oftentimes people feel alone in their journey or in their struggle with mental health services. And the more we talk about it and the more we have that open dialogue, the more supported they may feel and safe they may feel to continue on their healing journey to address their mental health. And so, no, talking about suicide does not increase an individual's risk of committing suicide.
Oh, now I know you do a lot of people that drop off all the information. You're basically a pseudo therapist, You're like
I'm step one to the therapy, right?
Yeah, because you and barbers and bartenders always seem to get everybody's issues, and they talk to you about everything. And I know you're a fountain of information, so how do you handle all this information that people come to you dealing with their personal stuff?
I have amazing clients who would like really do a well job at taking care of the family unit.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I wanted to ask about is the trends as far as suicide with the younger groups.
Mm.
Have we seen an uptrend with them? Is it going down? Or is it just staying the same? What are the teenagers doing? Because I talk to a lot of I see them grow up and go off to college. Some of them you get to see them and actually talk to them, and they're really well founded and have really good foundations. And then there's some that's visiting and they're just kind of scattered through, and they're very offish teenagers. You don't know what's going on in their heads, a lot of them. But what's the trend as far as the teenagers are concerned?
Unfortunately, there has been an increase in suicide attempts by preteens and teenagers since the start of the pandemic. Teens are feeling significantly more isolated, having, most of the socialization happens in school with their peers, and being isolated from that and not having the balance of supportive services in place to address what they may be experiencing and going through. So there has been an increase.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Because you see it on the news and you kind of hear it trending, but it's like, is this really what's going on? So as far as preventing and like building up these great foundations and households, what are some of the things that we can constantly remind the people in our community to kind of instill and keep going with the children, to keep them on a proper mindset, have a healthy mindset?
So what can we do to help our teens have a healthier mindset? As much the side of me wants to say take them phones, but for a lot of teens and a lot of individuals, that is our socialization, that is our community. I live in a different state than I was born in. A lot of my friends of 20 plus years, I communicate with them through the phone. Whether it be Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, all of that wonderful jazz. So as much as I want to say take the phones away, I also want to say understand that sometimes that is that person's only way to socialize. But beyond that, having open, honest conversations with your teens and your children about their mental health. They know what they're going through without being dismissive of what their experience is just because they quote unquote have the internet now to be able to do research and do homework, and how easier it is to be a teen from an older generation to a younger generation. You guys have it easier. Those statements are very dismissive of the teen's experience. And understand there was a period of time where we could log off the internet as teenagers and not have to deal with our high school bullies until the next day. Well, the way society is now, there is no off. There is no off for teens or preteens and our children, this generation coming up, in the same way that there was an off when we were younger. And so they don't get a break. And so understanding that teenagers and preteens and so on don't have that off anymore. So being supportive, being honest, and sitting with them, asking them about their mental health, not, again, minimizing their experience just because it's different than your experience as a teen. And I think that that's what we do sometimes as an older generation. We feel like you have it easier than I do. I don't have a phone. I don't have the internet at my hand. I didn't have the internet at my hands when I was younger. And then affirming their experience. And if that child is asking you to see a therapist, get them connected to a therapist. It is okay. It does not reflect on you as being a bad parent, because your child wants to have a therapist. They want to have a safe place to talk to. So you should I would encourage the teenager who is asking for therapy. Yes, we will work on this. We will find a therapist so you can address your mental health, because they know what they're going through. Kids are very smart. They're incredibly resilient as well, but they're also very smart, and they have different experiences that we do. We have to honor who they are as individuals. as they come into themselves. That was a lot. I'm sorry.
Oh, that was good.
No, that was awesome.
That was
So
great.
can we give out some, like, I guess, easy approachable phrases? So when we say talk to your kids about their mental health, how are we approaching that conversation? Because I'm not walking up to my kid and saying, "Hey son, how's your mental health today?" Like, what are some good phrases we can kind of, actually approach someone outside of, something so generic? It's to kind of break the ice and kind of chisel away to kind of get to how they're really doing.
There you have it. There is a question. How are you doing today? How are you doing? What was that? And I always like to start off with what was the highlight of your day, meaning what was the best part of your day, and what was the low light of your day, the not so good part of your day. And were you comfortable today? Did you feel scared at any point today? Or were you happy or joyful? What made you, so you could be present with that child and really experience their day. And then when you hear something as a parent or as a loved one that seems a little off, saying, hey, how's your mental health? I noticed that you've been stressed for the last couple of weeks. Do you want to talk about it some more? Is there something I can do as your parent to help support you a little bit better? Or, and then following up. And let's be honest, sometimes we as parents get so caught up in our own lives that we forget to be present for our children and being intentional about making time to have these discussions about their day, about what's going on in school, about their friends, without judgment. You may not like their friend, and it's okay.
Right. That's so true.
Right.
It's okay. They need to experience life too. And sometimes we get overprotective, or we try to we're trying to protect our child, and that's fair. That's, as a parent, that is fair to do. But a child has to discover and come into their own. And I think it starts, circling back to the original question, it starts with asking, how was your day? What was the good part of your day? What was the not so good part of your day? Is there anything that, you would have wanted to change about your day? If so, what would it have been? Without judgment. Because then we jump in there and say, oh, your friend ain't da 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 da. You need to leave them alone anyway, and that's cool. But just be present. Just be present and ask them about their day every day, or at least talk to your child.
Yeah. I love the fact that you said ask them about the highlights and the lowlights. I think that's something really easy to kind of get used to, having those conversations. Kid jump in the car after school, give me the highlights, give me the lowlights. Like, what happened today? You can really break the ice like that. I like that one.
And then it's really about emotion too, right? It's about what they felt was the good part of their day. And it's not about that test that they failed and how they needed to study better because they was up playing the PS5 all night. They know.
Right.
It is about when you failed that exam, how did you feel about that? Okay. How do you feel about yourself? What are you going to do differently if there is something to do differently? And then again, let them decide what they are going to do differently. Don't say, well, you shouldn't have been up all night anyway. They know.
They know. Yeah. Yeah.
But it is, again, making the conversation about the emotion versus the act, or versus the school versus the test versus the person. When we're talking about mental health, make it more of an emotion-based conversation. How did you feel about that? How was your day? How did you feel about your day today? Was it a good day or not so good day? And how could we have done it differently?
Nice.
That's good. That's really good. Now, here's a question for you, Della. Do people just threaten suicide just for attention?
No. No, I would not say that.
I'm shocked. I'm shocked. I would have thought you would have said, yeah.
I think at the point where someone is saying, I am suicidal, or I'm going to commit suicide, I think that's an invitation to say, let's either call the, crisis hotline, let's call 911, or let's get you into therapy to work through your experiences and why you're making these statements. Because there is something that needs to be addressed there. There is something that isn't being heard, and that person is making those statements for a reason. So it's important to get that individual assessed.
And to take it serious. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, because you know how growing up, if you break up with a young lady, all of a sudden she calls you talking about, you broke
Yeah.
my heart, I'm gonna kill myself. And all of a sudden
Yeah.
you're like, what? Oh no, baby, ain't that bad. Come on now, come on. And then no,
Mhm.
no. And then all of a sudden you're on the uproar, like, oh my God. I hope I'm not the cause of her demise. So now you're all messed up. You go over how she sitting there eating Fritos talking about, I got you, didn't I?
Fritos.
Fritos though.
Mhm.
Fritos.
Anyway.
Right? Oh, come on now.
Mhm.
And then you mad because he's like, oh, see, she used that as an emotion. It's like the kid that cries wolf. It's like
Mhm.
you say it, and eventually somebody, she ain't gonna do nothing. And then something happens. So that was a question I had to ask because I can't tell you how many guys said that. I can't tell you how many guys said, man, she said she gonna kill herself. So I ran over there. Now, in my case, a little extreme saying she was eating Fritos. Well, a lot of times they went over there. She was about to go out to the club or something like that. So I want people to understand that every time somebody says that, it's you want to
Take
kind of
it.
think about it.
Yeah. Anytime someone says something about their mental health, as a licensed professional, I say, let's take it seriously. Have you talked to a therapist about that? Have you talked to anyone about that before? How long has this been going on? Let's get connected. Let's normalize saying, hey, yeah, I'm seeing a therapist right now and we're working through these feelings. And so yeah, that's my statement. Tell them, come bring your Fritos to my couch.
Mhm, mhm,
There is so
mhm.
much to therapy, and I do want to normalize kind of what. Let's talk about that. What is therapy? When you first go to see a licensed clinician, you call, you make your. Let me back up. If you are feeling like someone may benefit from therapy, they can go on Psychology Today. They can go on therapy for Black men, therapy for Black girls. They can call their insurance agency. There's typically a 1-800 number on the back of the insurance cards where they can let the individual know that they want to receive mental health services. And they'll connect that individual to a person or a practice in their area, a private practice in the area, or a clinician in the area that is accepting their insurance. And so you call the provider, meaning you call the therapist, and you say, hey, I'm interested in counseling services. I have a lot going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
They bring the clinician will set up the appointment with you, and typically you have what is called an intake assessment, where you're describing what has been going on with you over the last however long, and so if it's a recent breakup with a significant other, and that's the area that you want to address in therapy, that therapist will go through those services, those experiences with you. They will walk with you through that. What was the good of that relationship? Was it not so good? But who were you in that relationship? There is a lot of different therapeutic approaches. Some is cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're looking at that individual's thoughts and their behaviors and how it's connected. There's relational therapy, where we're talking about that individual's relationships. There's therapeutic approaches that focus on the past and past early childhood trauma. And there are other therapies that focus on being in the here and now. And so with that being said, your therapist will do that intake assessment. Sometimes on that first or second assessment, you will receive a mental health diagnosis. And diagnosis is for your insurance agency so that they can bill so that person, and then it also gives you information as to what is going on with you. Like, hey, I've noticed you've experiencing these symptoms for the last 6 months. Let's really work on addressing that. And then as a clinician moving forward, they'll give you a treatment plan, and you'll meet weekly, bi-weekly, just really depend on that person. And sometimes a therapist may recommend medication management to address maybe because there's that nature versus nurture argument. Where is it a chemical imbalance, or is there something wrong with my brain, is what some people say. Is it my sugar that's acting up? Sometimes it's a chemical imbalance that you may benefit from medication management to address some mood changes. And so that's what a psychiatrist is for. A psychiatrist prescribes mental health medication, whereas a mental health therapist, we do individual counseling services or talk therapy. But there's also different kinds of talk therapy. And so you work with that clinician until such time as you feel like your symptoms have been alleviated. And so until such time as you feel like that girl with the Fritos is no longer around no more, you good now, you can go on to your next relationship, and that's cool. But we also talk about, when I'm thinking about relationships, I'm thinking about relational therapy and how we can improve our relationships with other people. What is it within ourselves? Is it our communication style? Is it how we view our mother and our father, different genders? What is it that is going on within us so that we can repair that, so that we can have healthy, happier relationships moving forward? So that is therapy. Therapy is a really safe place to lay it all out on the floor, the ins, the outs, and in a non-judgmental way, right? Because the therapist is not paid to judge you. We're not here to judge you. We want to know what's going on so that we can best help you live a fulfilling life. And so that is therapy. It is not judgment. It is not about sending you to the hospital. It is not about over medicating you. It is really about creating that safe place for you to lay everything down and move forward in life.
So that's great to know. Now, I have to ask you this particular question. You can go to church and go to therapy at the same time, can't you?
Yes.
I love it.
I ask that because I want nobody to think like, oh Lord, that's against what the Lord said in the book, and they don't want to go to therapy. So I just want to make everybody, the people, the religious people who may watch this, to feel comfortable. Yes, you can go to church and go to therapy, and don't feel like you're doing somebody wrong. You're doing the Lord wrong, or you're doing the pastor wrong, or the church wrong. So I just to lay that out.
That is hilarious. That is, yes, you can pray and go to therapy. You can have your faith practices and go to therapy. There's pastoral counseling where there are licensed pastoral clinical counselors. So you can go to even see a clinician that is supportive of your particular religious approach and receive mental health counseling, as well as honor your relationship with a higher power.
Yeah, some therapy and some prayer. I think that's a dynamic duo.
I said the same thing. I'm like, you have to do the work to get to where you need to get to. So I mean, you just can't just think about praying it away, because you have to do some other things. And to have someone like you, Della, who does this type of work, I have to commend you, because all the stories that you hear, and you have to really find out from that particular person what's going to take to get them from A to Z. That's amazing.
It is. Thank you for that. I am passionate about human behavior. I love mental health. I love creating safe places for individuals. That's what therapy is. It is a safe place to put it all down and sort it out like a jigsaw puzzle. How can we put this back together in a way that makes a beautiful picture? And some people get confused along the way, and that's okay. That's what therapists is here for. We're here to put it back together in a way that best suits that individual.
That's beautiful. That's information that everybody need to know. Now, if I'm going through crisis right now, what can I do? What should I do?
If you're in the middle of a mental health crisis right now, my strongest recommendation would be to go to your local hospital emergency room, or to call 988 to get connected immediately to a mental health crisis counselor.
Great. And the other thing, let's say I don't have any insurance. Could I still get help if I'm going through something? Could I just reach out to someone and say, "Hey, I don't have insurance, but I'm going through this crisis." So there is some help out there.
Yeah, so the the crisis hotline, the 988 crisis hotline, is absolutely free. There are no fees to talk to that crisis therapist, and a lot of outpatient mental health clinics offer sliding fee scale so that you can get therapy. If you have to pay for cash, you can get therapy that way. I would also recommend, if you don't have health insurance, to go on your local state's health department website and apply for medical insurance so that all areas can be covered. Because as much as we want to address our mental health, we also want to make sure we're addressing our physical health, and vice versa. It all comes together. So make sure you have insurance to get your physical as well.
Oh my God, this has been a lot of great information for everybody out here, and I learned something today, that you can co-mix religion and therapy. Who would have thought it?
I learned that 988 number. I think that's amazing. I never knew about it, never heard it before. And yeah, we're going to spread the word for all those who didn't know about that hotline before.
Without
it's absolutely
question.
free. It's 24 hours a day. You can even go on the 988 website and text the crisis hotline number, so you always have someone available to you.
Oh my God, that is great. Now, Della, since you're the founder of information, how could the peoples reach you?
So I am only licensed, a licensed professional counselor in the state of Maryland. So if you are in the state of Maryland and you're interested in receiving individual counseling services with myself, feel free to call 410-412-7791. Right now, I only accept Maryland Medicaid for health insurance. So yeah, that's how you get in touch with me. Or you can find me online on Instagram at AugustRoseHealthCenter.com. August Rose Health Center, where you can also receive psychiatric rehabilitation services.
Oh, that is beautiful. That's beautiful. You have any other questions, T, before we wrap this up?
No, I think we called the gym today.
Yes, we did. We did. We definitely did. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave all this information at the end of this particular podcast, so you'll be able to reach out to any one of us to, and I'll make sure that we get the information to where it needs to get to. But I just want to thank both of you ladies for being here and passing that knowledge. And again, this particular podcast, how do we get here? It doesn't really matter how we got here, but we need to get out of here and we need to do better. So this is what this is going to be about. It's about teaching you, informing you, and you make the change. I call it the TIC principle. So that's what we're going to be concentrating on, making sure you're a better person. You got problems, we're going to solve your problems. We're going to move on to the next one. So we're going to be back. This is not the last time you're going to see Miss Della, because I'm going to bring her on for other mental health things. She's my mental health guru. I had to talk about suicide today. That was the most pressing thing. And, people going through that this time of the year, just all the time, not even just Christmas, just across all during the year, it's an issue. So we're going to be back with more conversations, more, feedback from you guys. Let us know. And again, I'm going to leave all this information at the end of this particular podcast. And again, love all you guys and stay healthy out there. Peace.
Bye.